We've got with us for the next half hour or so Dan Ives. He's partner and senior managing director at Yorkville Ives. It's the first time I've read that title for you, Dan, because for so long we knew you at Wedbush, and we knew you as this what many people called a tech perma bull. I want to get to your outlook on not just this earnings season and what to expect from NVIDIA and the so-called circular financing. But before we do that, because we haven't had a chance to sit down with you since this job change, I want to just hear from you why you left Wedbush and what you're doing now at Yorkville Ives.
Yeah, I mean, for me, and look, it was a great 8 years at Wedbush, but it was to create what I view as like a modern merchant bank. Really something where when I think about this fourth industrial revolution, and for my, call it going in Wall Street since the late 90s, it was seeing around corners and seeing the opportunity. And I just felt like for me, it was an evolution in my career for something that to build a bank and especially have great research that's focused on tech, energy, and really across industries. And I found great partners in Yorkville. And to me, it was the right place, right time to do something like this, given my view of the AI revolution.
Well, I want to get to more on that, and we're going to get to the AI revolution. But we spoke to you at Future Proof, where you'll be there again this year. It was in September of last year, and I remember the conversation because it was not just about what you were doing at Wedbush, but it was about the ETF that you had launched. You were also chairman at the time of WorldCoin, this crypto project,
or ACO, yeah.
Oh, ACO, thank you. Which was.
Yeah, which was related to WorldCoin.
Okay, related to WorldCoin. So what is the status of those projects now?
Yeah, so in terms of I left ACO.
Yeah, but what about the ETF?
Year. Yeah, and that there's been no change in terms of that. And that's something where for me, look, it was sort of like simplifying, I think some of my other activities. And really, to me, it was really like doubling down to some extent on what people know me as in terms of when it comes to tech, when it comes to, great research. And I think around the world, so many more investors have such a focus in tech, and it's something where to try to be some guiding light, relative to a lot of the confusion that you see in the market.
What can you do now that you couldn't do before?
I mean, we're still awaiting our research license.
Yeah.
But for now, this is like when it's all sort of built, it will be something that it will be exactly the same Dan Ives research and what we've done for investors over the decades, and that's really why we built it. But also, it's for me, it's finding the right people that want to do things. And when it comes to innovation, when it comes to building, whether it's on the research side or, across the industry. And I just think right now, we're going through an innovation boom. And in my career, it's really been an evolution. For me, there was a natural next step.
Yeah.
And I've been super excited about the feedback that we've gotten and just, from many around the world.
We have seen a lot of innovation cycles, and you have been along for that ride. And I'm just curious how you continue to put this particular cycle in its place and in its spot. And how much do we really know about the ultimate impact?
I mean, as someone like myself that's spent so much time in Asia, so much time talking to CEOs, CIOs, that's done this since the late 90s. This is a true fourth industrial revolution. And look, we've talked about it with you guys for many years. And that's why I think a lot of times like the skeptics or the bears, they're bearish from the 15th floor of their New York City office building or wherever it may be, but they're not in fabs in Taiwan. They're not seeing the demand. And the reality is, for the first time in 30 years, the U.S. is ahead of China when it comes to tech. And I think that's extremely important relative to where we are. And I think what you've seen with earnings, whether it's on the neoclouds, the hyperscalers, it is crystal clear that the monetization phase is now starting to take over.
But do we have to be worried about China? Because they certainly have the government now saying, okay, they are prioritizing this. And with money, with efforts, how it works. We've seen it with cars. We've seen it with EV. We've seen it in so many different industries. And they want to make sure they have a place at the table with this. So how do you how far are they along? What do we really know about their expertise?
Yeah, so I think as someone that myself that spends so much time in the region, it's one like counting them out is the wrong bet. Because the reality is that not just from a government perspective when it comes to energy, just how ahead they've been when it comes to nuclear energy, when it comes to robotics. And it's one where I think part of why Jensen is so focused on selling into China, and I think a lot of the chip companies, because if you do not sell into China, it just makes them that much more powerful.
Yeah.
It narrows the gap. And also when it comes to like the political, whether it's grandstanding, whatever you want to call it, in terms of like what's happened here on the data centers. And look, data centers are the hearts and lungs of the AI revolution. So if you have like moratoriums and you shut down data centers, the winner in that becomes China relative to what could happen here in the US. So I actually think like the biggest sort of risk when you think about what could happen to AI revolution, it's not CapEx, it's not use cases. The biggest risk is just the political piece gets in the way in terms of the data center build outs, because I think that's something where every data center that gets voted down, China smiles.
I think we have time for this question. It's a really good one. It's from Brendan in Maryland.
Oh, yeah.
He has a question for you. He says, you've likened the AI revolution to building out the Vegas Strip in the 50s. Can you elaborate on this analogy? What role is Microsoft playing here? Are the hyperscalers like the big casinos? And famously, does the house always win?
Great question. Look, and the reason I talk about like Vegas 1955, because if someone told you in 1955 what eventually the Sphere was going to be and what Vegas was, but then all of a sudden in 1956 there was an issue with the building, you're like, the Strip thing's not going to happen. It's not going to work. Yeah. It just, that's big tech companies, like that's their view, right? Like go back to Microsoft is a good example. Like 2 months ago, right? Like New York City cab drivers bearish on Microsoft, and now look today, right? There's ticker tape parades for it. It just speaks like, because you have like Nadella is a North Star, and he's able to see around corners and understand that on the Vegas Strip, there's only one strip. If you don't have a place on that strip, are you staying at that hotel 2 miles from Vegas? Eventually you're in Santa Fe or whatever. I mean, the point is, I'm just trying to explain, like these companies know there's one strip. And that's why when it's like, well, what about CapEx? If it's like Meta, like stocks down, does that mean that they start to, they like slow down their bill? Because they know that if they slow it down, they won't have a place in the strip. And then what happens when you look out a few years from now and you're 3 miles off the strip?
But do we need all of this on the strip is I guess what I'm wondering. There's a second part of Brendan's question. When we come back, I want to ask Dan Ives, partner and senior managing director at Yorkville. Ives joining us right here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. Stick around, folks. More to come with Dan in just a moment.
We've got back with us, and we are back with Dan Ives, partner and senior managing director at Yorkville Ives. He joins us here in the Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio.
I want to get to the second part of Brendan's question.
What
from
a
Maryland.
great question in 2 parts.
Bloomberg.com/askradio.
Yes.
That's how Brendan was able to ask the question. Bloomberg.com/askradio.
This is for terminal subscribers, Bloomberg terminal subscribers, and those who also are subscribers to Bloomberg.com. So he went on, Dan, to say even more, some question whether this AI boom is due to chip sellers logging revenues faster than reporting their expenses. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So I view it as right now demand to supply for chips. 13, 14 to 1. Demand to supply. Yeah, the one thing is that, look, I view the whole thing as kind of like a Jenga puzzle, however you want to think about it. You put it together.
Right.
Whether it's Cisco, NeoCloud, hyperscalers, what's happened, Palantir on the reality is that they hold the cards, the chip players, because you don't have many of them and you're not going to create new ones. And that's similar to what you see in Korea and the cost with the memory players. And I just think it's one where when some try to kind of poke holes in some of these stores, the reality is, and it's always been our view, that like investors are way underestimating the scale and scope of the AI revolution.
But wouldn't you say, and certainly we've heard this around this table, of the semiconductor makers who are very sensitive to the cycles of the booms and busts, that they are going to be very careful also in controlling supply in the market. So yes, they're going to invest and they're going to ramp up, but they're not going to do it so much that all of a sudden the price drops. So there's got to be I don't know what the factor is that in that excess demand 13, 14 times, whatever you said, for chips. How much of that, though, is the semiconductor companies being very smart in kind of managing the situation and keeping those margins healthy?
I think at one point you'll hit that, but for now,
no.
Look, equilibrium you won't hit till probably 2028. Maybe early 2029.
Everybody keeps talking about 2030. I'm like, I'm going to have it tattooed on my forehead because it just feels like I won't do that.
Please don't.
And that's why the reality is we've always thought, like, AI revolution, like, look, we thought it was third inning, and now you could argue is it bottom of the second.
When you go to China, when you travel, like, I want to ask you about China. Like, what do you actually get to see in terms of what's going on there? Because I just feel like they're so... I don't think it's so easy, but I'm curious because when somebody does get a peek into some of what's going on in China, I think it really surprises everybody.
It's the innovation. It's really what they're doing on robotics, on what they're doing in chips, on what they're doing on when you think about physical AI. To me, that is the thing that stands out the most because I think the name of the game in AI today, you could argue like some of the stuff is almost table stakes relative to when you go to physical AI and when you go to what sort of the next phase is here. And that's why right now, like robotics, autonomous, true physical AI, I've always viewed physical AI as sort of the golden goose of...
So agentic AI and agents, that's not the gold.
I view that as a highway to get onto ultimately what's going to be probably the biggest monetization piece. And I think that's why, like a lot of times, I think investors, whether it's like China in terms of open source and different models that come and we go through these sort of like mini scales, DeepSeek type moments, the value is in the data. That's why sovereign data, when you look at Carp and Palantir, they talk about so much. Jensen's starting to talk about a lot. But it's an arms race that's playing out across the board, which speaks, as you to like circular financing and just... we go through these sort of ebbs and flows and the worries there.
Well, speaking of worries, some folks out there are worried about concentration risk. We spoke to Ed Zitron a few weeks ago from EZ Primary Research. He was on our program. Here's what he said about concentration risk.
So in calendar year 2025, according to my own reporting about OpenAI's numbers, 69% of the year-over-year growth of Microsoft Intelligent Cloud segment was actually from OpenAI. Without that, it would have only grown 8% year-over-year, which is barely beating inflation. And so everyone is being sold what I consider kind of a lie. It's honestly kind of a scandal.
That was Ed Zitron of EZ Primary Research. After he was on, just a few days later, our Bloomberg News team reported that Microsoft generates most of its AI revenue from OpenAI. It said that about 70% of sales in a year came from just a couple of different companies. Microsoft's business, 70% of its actual AI sales came from OpenAI during its most recent fiscal year. Is there concentration risk?
But that would be like the Chiefs. If they lost Mahomes, they're done. The point is like the reality is like OpenAI and Anthropic, their core central foundations of the AI, no one will doubt that. But the reality is that when you continue to see the funding there and what's happening, is that the tech companies, whether it's the hyperscalers and others, they have so much invested in them, but that's just the first phase. That number, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, the concentration risk is not going to be.
Meaning there will be many companies that are paying.
Of course, because
these services.
Exactly, because today it's a small group of companies that are paying. But when you think about what's happening with sovereign AI, and today really being much more just U.S. based and China based, what's happened in the Middle East and India and just across the world, we're still in the early parts of it. But that's why OpenAI and Anthropic, when you think about as they go public and those opportunities, that just further solidifies the foundation for the AI revolution.
I'm going to play devil's advocate to you because I think what someone had said too is that, okay, so most of the revenue comes from the AI revenue for Microsoft comes from OpenAI, but help me out here. I'm giving you a gift because I'm usually tough. I like to battle with you. But the idea is OpenAI has a ton of customers. And so that's where the diversification is, but it comes through that conduit. So I guess essentially if Microsoft and OpenAI go to battle, that could be a problem. But is that the right reasoning? Sorry, Tim.
No,
that's fine.
No, but to that point is that the concentration risk, it's not just viewed as like it's OpenAI. OpenAI, you're talking about thousands of customers. Anthropic, same thing, what they're doing in the enterprise. It used to be like what I view, like let's say from Microsoft, it'd be like concentration risk. But Microsoft is the core part of enterprises around the world. So Microsoft represents so many enterprises that are ultimately going. So I understand, like, and that's been that's been a concern. But 18 months ago, it was a concern. Look where we are today, and that's why I think those that bet against this. It's betting against a CapEx cycle that actually continues to accelerate.
It feels like there was this moment in New York in like the mid 2000 teens where all these venture capital backed companies were flush with cash, and Uber and Lyft were duking it out, giving you incentives to like take this car, take this car, and you as a consumer, and there was a service that came and picked up a package at my home and shipped it off, and it was free. They went out of business. But the point is that venture capitalists were subsidizing this sort of on-demand lifestyle. It kind of feels like sometimes we're there with these LLMs.
Where's the checks?
Like, it's free to use Claude. Then 20 minutes later, you're like, okay, well, I can't use Claude anymore. I'll just go use ChatGPT. Okay, you used up everything with ChatGPT. Oh, I'll go just, go to Google and use the AI that Google offers. Like, it kind of feels like we're in that moment again where these are interchangeable, at least the LLMs.
But I've never viewed that the models... the models is not going to be where the value. That's why Anthropic and OpenAI, they're seeing around the corner. They're focused on enterprise build, enterprise sales force, ultimately really butting heads with core enterprise players. It's going to be in the data. I mean, if you just look where it's all heading, it is just going to be a conduit. Because eventually models, you're going to have hundreds of models. You'll have models regional, vertical. It'll get more and more commoditized. Industry specific, construction models, retail, consumer. The point is and that's also where if you think where Apple's starting to go on the consumer side in terms of they'll finally be a sort of player. But I just think it's one where AI is today and where it's going to be 3-4 years from now. I think for many investors, look, you get 1 or 2 investors. You have to be, if you're a technologist and maybe and someone that tries to see around corners up, you're going to view it as this is a true fourth industrial revolution. If you're one of the bears that have called 10 of the last 2 downturns, then you'll say this is another one, and they'll be in hibernation mode, and they can't see AI in spreadsheets.
But you're a smart man. What's the risk? We have about a minute or so left. There's a risk to everything.
The biggest risk is government.
It's oversight, regulatory.
When you look at what's happening in New York State, Hochul, moratorium.
You're talking about data centers.
That's the biggest. Midterm elections, the political.
It's not just New York. There are a lot of local
but around the country. And I spent so
much
much time in D.C. And the point is a lot of politicians that are still using BlackBerries, do you want them ultimately determining AI? And I think that's the scary thing, right? It's one where what stifles innovation, now you need regulatory, no doubt.
Yeah.
And PR problem, a lot of that has been caused by the tech industry in terms of saying wiping out jobs, 18 months, scare tactics, things like that. So they've definitely contributed. But I think that is the biggest risk when you think about AI revolution relative to the political piece.
Do you think AI, though, it's going to wipe out tons of jobs. People talk about universal basic income. I've talked to developers. We've talked to developers about thinking about building houses for people who are on, because of AI. Forgive me, only about 40 seconds.
But I'll just take the other side. And someone like myself, I went over 3.5 million air miles and been around this country so many times. The amount of towns and cities, they used to have 75,000 people, now it's 10,000. Factories that went away to China, Malaysia.
Yeah.
And I view it as, for the first time in 30 years, the U.S. is ahead of China when it comes to technology. So the innovation boom and to what I view as really a renaissance, I view that as to add jobs in the United States, despite maybe some of the more negative views today.
All right, so go get that research license and come back.
I will. and I can't wait.